Right, so if you want to know who's actually trying to stop the slaughter in Gaza, don't waste your time squinting at the photo ops from summits or parsing the careful euphemisms of deep concern from Western foreign ministries. Look to the quaysides instead. Look to the men and women in hi-vis vests, not tailored suits, who can smell a weapons shipment before the ink is dry on the shipping manifest, and who don't need a UN resolution to tell them it's wrong to help send it. In Genoa this week, they didn't just hold placards for the cameras, they literally boarded a Saudi-owned ship, the Bahri Yanbu, stuffed with military cargo as it was, some of it made right there in Italy as it happened, destined via the usual webs of plausible deniability to fuel Israel's war on Gaza. They documented it, they made it public, they refused to lift a finger to move it, as their fellow dockworkers in France and Spain and Morocco and Greece have done before them. The dissent growing all around the Mediterranean now against touching the tools of genocide. Meanwhile, Giorgia Meloni's government, so fond of voicing concerns over civilian casualties, was busy making arms exports easier, not harder. So it fell to the dockers to enforce the very laws their leaders were gutting, to take the kind of action that can actually choke a war machine. And they did it without the theatrics or summitry of the moral cowardice of both sides' diplomacy. Just a simple, defiant, and working class no. Right, so in the half-light of early morning on the 7th of August, the quayside at Genoa's Ponte Ethiopia looked like any other workday. Forklifts and cranes were standing ready, ships lay berthed, all the usual hum of activity was beginning to stir. But that morning was different. The rhythms of commerce were broken by the purposeful arrival of a different kind of shift. 40 dock workers, many wearing the red vests of Italy's trade union federation USB and carrying the flags of the Collettivo Autonomo Lavoratori Portuali, CALP or CALP trade union, marched towards a hulking roll-on, roll-off cargo vessel called the Bahri Yanbu. And they did not come to unload its cargo. They came to stop it. Within minutes, several had boarded the ship, moving directly towards the decks and holds where the military cargo was stowed. This was no symbolic picket or banner drop here this time. They had advanced intelligence from their own ship tracking networks and allied unions abroad. What they found confirmed the warnings they'd been given. The hold contained armoured vehicles, tanks, crates of ammunition, and a 76mm Otto Melara naval gun, unmistakably the product of Leonardo, Italy's largest arms manufacturer, and one of the world's most powerful defence firms. The Bahri Yanbu had arrived from Baltimore, a regular stop on Pentagon logistics routes. In Genoa, it was due to take on additional Italian-made weaponry. For the dockers, that meant direct complicity in Israel's ongoing assault on Gaza, a campaign that, as we know, plausibly amounts to genocide, so they refused to touch the cargo. But they did document it. USB's declaration after the action was as blunt as it was uncompromising. We don't work for war. The union cited Italy's law 18590, which prohibits arms exports to states engaged in armed conflicts in violation of international law, and Article 11 of the Italian Constitution, which repudiates war as an instrument of aggression against the freedom of other peoples. Both legal instruments are more than just slogans. Law 18590 was won after years of public campaigning to stop Italian arms flowing to repressive regimes. Article 11 is a constitutional safeguard born from Italy's own descent into fascism and its catastrophic wartime experience. In theory, they give the Italian state both the authority and the obligation to block exactly the kind of shipment the Bahri Yanbu represented. In practice, successive governments there have hollowed out their force, and Giorgia Meloni's coalition has even moved to weaken the law by reducing parliamentary oversight and streamlining arms export approvals. As Euronews and Atlas of Wars have reported, these reforms would make it easier, not harder, for companies like Leonardo to send weapons to conflict zones. So the dockers were not just defying their employers here, they were enforcing a legal and moral duty that their own government had abdicated. So the significance of Genoa's action becomes all the more clearer when set against a broader regional pattern that we've seen across the last several months, certainly. Across the Mediterranean in recent months, dock workers have been at the forefront of refusing to handle arms shipments bound for Israel. In Marseille, members of the CGT union have turned away Israeli-linked cargoes, some suspected of containing military components. In Piraeus, the Greek trade union PAME has blocked Zimline vessels linked to Israeli arms logistics, and Enedep saw dock workers block 5 shipments of military-grade steel just a month ago. In Tangier and Casablanca, Moroccan dockers have slowed or refused the processing of Israeli-related cargo, despite their government's normalization of ties with Israel under the Abraham Accords. Spanish ports such as Valencia and Bilbao have seen the Coordinadora Dockers Union take similar steps. These actions are not emerging in isolation either. As People's World has documented, they are coordinated through a growing network of port unions who share ship movement intelligence, alert each other to suspect cargo, and in some cases synchronize refusals so that the same vessel is denied service in multiple ports in succession. The Bahri Yanbu is a familiar adversary in this world. Saudi-owned through Bahri, the national shipping company of Saudi Arabia, so this is the Saudi state complicit in all of this. It has been targeted by Genoa's dockers before. Back in May of 2019, CALP members refused to load it with arms bound for the Saudi-led war in Yemen, as covered by Daily Sabah at the time and other outlets. In February 2020, they did it again. Amnesty International and ACAT France have chronicled Bahri's role in transporting military cargo from multiple conflicts, often under NATO or Pentagon charter. Its vessels frequently carry mixed cargo, taking on arms from different countries along their routes and delivering them through transshipment hubs, which obscures the ultimate destination. A weapon loaded in Genoa might be offloaded in Jeddah, then re-exported or passed through US military logistics to Israel. This complexity is all deliberate, of course. It's all designed to provide plausible deniability for all involved. Saudi Arabia's role in this supply chain underscores a deep political hypocrisy on their part here, therefore. Publicly, Riyadh maintains that it will not normalise relations with Israel until there is progress towards a Palestinian state. In practice, as Press TV's coverage of the Genoa action noted, Saudi shipping assets are part of a logistical network that moves Western-made arms for multiple allied militaries, Israel included. For dockworkers in Genoa, this was not an abstract diplomatic contradiction, it was a manifest reality, spelled out in the cargo manifest in their hands. By blocking the Bahri Yanbu, they were drawing a line not only against Italian and Israeli militarism, but against an Arab state enriching itself from the machinery of war being turned on another Arab people. The Genoa blockade also demonstrated the maturation of a cross-border labour alliance here too. USB and CALP have cultivated ties with dockworkers' organisations across the Mediterranean. People's Dispatch has profiled CALP's evolution from a local collective into a national symbol of port labour, rooted in ordinary working-class rank-and-file democracy and political consciousness. Back in June, as International Socialists covered, Genoa dockers coordinated with their counterparts in Piraeus to block an Israeli Zimline vessel, an action echoed in Marseille and Valencia before them. So these cross-union alliances are not just symbolic, they're operational. Unions share real-time tracking data, alert each other to suspicious consignments, and sometimes plan joint actions to maximise disruption. The upcoming International Dockworkers Assembly, scheduled for next month, in light of all of this, makes for something well worth keeping an eye out on then, doesn't it? This will bring together unions from at least 8 countries: Italy, France, Greece, Spain, Morocco, South Africa, Turkey, potentially Belgium as well, apparently. Its agenda includes formalising a standing anti-war ports network capable of mounting rolling blockades. If such a network to be established, the logistical consequences, with so many of these nations being Mediterranean or en route to the Mediterranean, could be severe for Israel's military supply chain. All of Israel's imported military hardware moves through Mediterranean routes these days because the Houthis of Yemen have basically rendered the Red Sea off limits to them. If a vessel carrying arms is denied unloading in Marseille, Valencia, Genoa and Piraeus in sequence, for example, the delays, the rerouting costs and political embarrassment multiplies. You're potentially looking realistically at the entire northern edge of the Mediterranean there being rendered useless to Israeli logistics. Shipping companies may be forced to try and seek alternative routes via the island states of the Mediterranean possibly, or North Africa, not including Morocco. But they still have to use the Med somehow, or try and run the gauntlet through the Red Sea once more. There is no other route available to Israel. Governments will face uncomfortable choices between cracking down on their own dock workers, risking strikes and massive political fallout, or pressing their allies to change military policy, which Israel, of course, will never do, not as desperate as Netanyahu is to stay in power. Mediterranean nations who try and facilitate this will face massive questions themselves in light of all of this. What happened in Genoa also speaks to a deeper question. Why is it that it's dock workers rather than the government enforcing the norms of humanitarian law? Because we've seen it in other states, as I've aforementioned already, Italy or sort of catching up to France, Spain and Greece, aren't they, at this point? Italy's government has the legal authority under that law, 18590, to halt arms shipments to Israel. And given the ICJ's finding of a plausible genocide in Gaza, it has the constitutional mandate under Article 11 to repudiate participation in aggressive war. And yet Meloni's coalition has not exercised that authority at all. Instead, it has actually sought to loosen export controls. But then it is a hard-right administration, isn't it? Therefore, we shouldn't be surprised that dock workers have stepped up to the plate here, using their industrial power, their power in numbers, their power of solidarity to stop what their political leaders will not. In doing so, they place themselves in that long tradition of labour internationalism, from the boycotts of South African cargo during apartheid to the refusal of Durban dockers in 2008 to unload a Chinese arms shipment bound for Zimbabwe. The legal arguments deployed by USB and CALP are not mere rhetorical flourishes, therefore. By framing their refusal as compliance with Italian law and the Constitution, they shield themselves against employer retaliation and any potential criminal charges for what they do. International labour law, including conventions of the International Labour Organization, recognises the right of workers to refuse dangerous or unethical work. Handling weapons bound for a war zone where civilians are being killed in large numbers, the dockers argue, meets that threshold, and I frankly would challenge anyone to try and dispute otherwise. This legalistic approach, therefore, also increases political pressure on the government. Prosecuting the dockers would require publicly arguing that aiding Israel's military campaign in Gaza is lawful and compatible with Italy's constitutional values. Good luck selling that bottle of snake oil. The symbolism of the Bahri Yanbu action has resonated because it was visible, direct and collective. The image of workers standing on the deck of a foreign-flagged ship, refusing to be the final link in a chain of complicity, cuts through the abstractions of policy debate. It also punctures the elaborate deniability built into the arms trade. The Cradle's reporting emphasised how multi-leg, multi-client shipping allows states and companies to obscure the true destination of weapons. By boarding the vessel, documenting its contents, the Genoa dockers made that destination and Italy's role in arming it impossible to ignore. The road ahead for the people's blockade will not be without challenges, though. Sustained rolling refusals across multiple ports requires resources, coordination and mutual support. Governments may test the resolve of the unions with legal threats or police intervention or efforts to divide workers, as bad as the optics of that will be. In Morocco, dockers have reportedly faced quiet pressure from authorities to downplay their actions. In Greece, PAME's actions has attracted police surveillance. In Italy, CALP and USB have faced legal harassment in the past for anti-war protests. The September Assembly will need to address these realities, therefore, perhaps by creating some sort of a rapid response solidarity mechanism so that an attack on one union triggers supportive actions in others. That solidarity is key. Yet the potential is clear. What is taking shape in the Mediterranean is not simply a series of protests, but the beginning of an independent enforcement mechanism for humanitarian norms, one rooted in the organised power of labour by ordinary working-class people. The power of ordinary working-class people demonstrated again. If governments will not impose an arms embargo on Israel in the face of overwhelming evidence of war crimes, workers can, and in some ports already are. This inversion of political agency from state to shop floor is what makes the movement so politically potent. It suggests that even in a globalised economy where capital flows freely and supply chains are tightly controlled, there are choke points where human beings can still say no. The Bahri Yanbu blockade in Genoa may be remembered as the moment Italy's dock workers decisively joined that effort. It was an action born of local organisation, shaped by international solidarity, and carried out in defiance of both the Italian government's complicity and the Saudi state's hypocrisy. It drew on a history of resistance in the same port where the same ship has been turned away before, and on a growing network of trade unions determined to make "we don't work for war" more than just a slogan. In the months ahead, as the International Dockworkers Assembly convenes and the possibility of a formal Mediterranean arms blockade comes into focus, the example set in Genoa will be both a rallying point and a test. It will measure whether a movement powered by ordinary working people can impose a moral red line where governments have failed to do so, and in doing so, change the course of a war, change the course of a genocide if you prefer. I do. Away from the Mediterranean, though, similar blockades are going on, but this time of a more political sort, as the Netherlands and Sweden have joined forces to try and sort out the impotence of the EU by seeking the suspension of the EU-Israel Association Agreement, which would put more than just arms at risk for Israel, but literally everything else too, coming from their biggest trade partner, as the EU is. But can they pull it off? Check out this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch to get the details of all of that. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.